What happens when the justice you deliver turns out to be a lie? Hi, friends. I hope you and your family are well, safe, grounded, and surrounded by peace. Because today's story, it's going to shake you. It's not just about the courtroom, it's about the cracks beneath it, the kind that don't show until someone falls through. This is a story of a judge who believed in the law, a young man who believed in fairness, and what happens when one mistake changes both their lives forever. Let's begin. The courtroom was thick with tension, not just the kind you could hear in held breaths or rustle in paper, but the kind you could feel, like the air itself was pressing in on every person seated inside. Even the light coming through the tall windows seemed harsh, slicing the room into sharp fragments of shadow and judgment. At the defense table stood a young man, Jalen Brooks, just 24. His suit was too big for his frame, hanging on him like a weight. A borrowed suit, maybe, the kind that says, "This is the best I've got." His hands shook slightly, but his eyes didn't move. They were steady, calm, locked between two places. The judge seated high on the bench, and the woman in the gallery, his mother, whose cheeks were wet with tears and whose hands never stopped shaking. The man on the bench was Judge Everett Cole. At 62, Judge Cole was legendary, the kind of judge law students studied in books, known for his clarity, composure, and unwavering devotion to the law. People didn't question his rulings, they respected them or feared them. That morning, Cole looked down at Jalen like he had looked at hundreds of defendants before. He believed what he saw: fingerprints, eyewitnesses, a crumbling alibi, a jury verdict, clean and decisive. The case was airtight, or so it seemed. "Jalen Brooks," Judge Cole began, his voice deep and composed. "You have been convicted by a jury of your peers of crimes that caused irreparable harm to this community." He paused, not for effect, just long enough for the weight of the moment to settle. "I hereby sentence you to 60 years in state prison." The gavel struck the block, a single clean sound that echoed in every ribcage in that room. For Jalen, it felt like a door slamming shut, like the last breath of a dream he barely had time to live. But still, he didn't break. He didn't fall apart, didn't cry, didn't scream. He simply turned, looked at his mother, and smiled, a faint, barely there smile, strength, defiance, or maybe hope, like he was saying, "It's not over." Judge Cole sat at the bench longer than usual. The reporters were already outside, tapping out headlines and adjusting their camera angles. "Young man sentenced in violent robbery. Justice delivered by veteran judge." Jalen's shackled steps echoed briefly down the hallway. Then silence, but Cole's hand still rested on the gavel. And for the first time in decades, doubt crept in. What if this wasn't justice? What if I got this one wrong? That night, Cole returned home to a house too quiet for comfort. In his study, bathed in the amber glow of a desk lamp, he sat alone. The clock ticked. The old wood floor creaked. Shadows clung to the corners like things unsaid. His briefcase sat unopened on the desk. He couldn't bring himself to reach for it, not tonight, because he couldn't stop seeing Jalen's face. Not angry, not pleading, just still, that steady, unshaking gaze. It haunted him. It wasn't the face of a man begging for mercy. It was the face of a man who believed he had been wronged. Cole rubbed his temples, trying to shake the thought. He picked up his coffee, cold now, bitter, just like the question brewing in his chest. "Are you sure, Everett? Absolutely sure?" For 35 years, Judge Cole had prided himself on being able to see the truth through confusion, through manipulation, through emotion. But now, that confidence felt cracked, like a pane of glass that still stands but strains under pressure. He reached for a stack of police files, routine paperwork from unrelated cases, something to distract him, but as he flipped through, one file stopped him cold. A robbery case from a few weeks prior, an inventory list of confiscated items, guns, wallets, jewelry, nothing unusual until one line. 9mm Beretta, serial number FZ79341, seized March 15th. Cole froze. That serial number, it was the same gun used as key evidence in Jalen's case. His eyes darted to the date again, March 15th. The robbery Jalen had been convicted of happened on March 17th. Cole read it again, then again. The weapon was in police custody 2 days before the crime. His voice cracked the silence. How is that possible? He shoved aside the other files, reaching for the trial documents. He flipped until he found it. Prosecution Exhibit B, 9mm Beretta recovered at crime scene. Defendant's fingerprints found on handle. But if the gun was already locked up when the crime happened, it couldn't have been at the scene. The room seemed to shrink. Cole sat back, the weight of realization crashing in. They built the whole case on this gun, and it shouldn't have even been there. His eyes fell to the gavel resting on a nearby shelf. Polished, heavy, a symbol of authority. For 35 years, that gavel had been his anchor. Now it felt like a weight, one that asked questions he didn't want to answer. Do I investigate this? What happens if I pull the thread? What if this cracks open more than just one case? But another voice spoke louder, a quieter one. The truth. If you let this go, you'll never look yourself in the mirror again. Cole reached for his phone. His hand trembled as he dialed. The call rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. Yeah? Dean, it's Everett. A long pause, then, Judge Cole. This a social call? No, Cole said. I need your help. I think I just sentenced an innocent man to 60 years. The house was eerily silent, save for the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional groan of old floorboards beneath the judge's slippers. Judge Everett Cole sat alone in his study, cloaked in the dim warmth of a desk lamp. The light didn't quite reach the corners of the room, where shadows seemed to linger like questions he wasn't ready to answer. His leather briefcase sat untouched at the edge of the desk, but he couldn't bring himself to open it, not tonight. Jalen Brooks's face refused to leave his thoughts. That unwavering gaze, not bitter, not scared, but locked in something else entirely. Conviction, hope, and maybe even disappointment. It wasn't the face of a criminal asking for mercy. It was the face of a man who had been sentenced and yet somehow hadn't given up. Cole rubbed his temples, trying to shake the image from his mind, but it clung to him like a cold fog. He reached for his coffee, grimaced at the bitter taste. It had gone cold. Somehow that felt fitting. Then came the question, quiet at first, but it pressed down on him like the shadows crowding the edges of the room. Are you absolutely certain he's guilty? For 35 years, Judge Cole had prided himself on seeing through lies, on trusting evidence, on believing that truth would always rise if the system was followed. But now, that confidence felt brittle, cracked by a single young man who refused to break. Cole pulled a stack of case files toward him, routine, unrelated paperwork, desperate for distraction. His fingers flipped through the pages until something stopped him cold, a police report. From an entirely different robbery case, one filed a few weeks before Jalen's trial. It seemed ordinary. A routine list of confiscated items, until his eyes landed on one line, 9mm Beretta, model PX4, serial number FZ79341, recovered on March 15th. Cole froze, his breath caught. That serial number, it matched the firearm used as a key piece of evidence in Jalen Brooks's case, and that report was clear. The weapon had been seized by police 2 days before the robbery Jalen had been convicted for. He leaned forward, heart pounding, reading the line again and again. If the gun had been in police custody before the crime, it couldn't have been at the scene. He flipped through Jalen's trial documents, tearing through pages now. The prosecution had leaned on that weapon hard. It had Jalen's fingerprints, they said. It was the nail in the coffin. But if it had been stored in the evidence locker before the robbery took place, someone had lied. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls too close, the air too thick. Cole's eyes landed on the gavel resting nearby on the shelf, smooth, polished, powerful. For 35 years, it had been his anchor. Now it felt like a weight, heavy, accusatory. Do I pursue this? What if this cracks everything open? My career, my reputation, my legacy. He stood abruptly, paced, sat back down. He stared at the gavel like it might speak, because if he ignored what he just found, he'd live with the possibility that he had locked away an innocent man. And if he pursued it, he might destroy everything he had built. The clock ticked past midnight, each second a steady reminder of the choice he didn't want to make. His hand trembled as he reached for the file again, and in that moment, he knew. This wasn't just a mistake. This was something bigger and far darker. The next morning, Judge Cole sat in a quiet diner at the edge of town. He didn't notice the smell of frying bacon or the murmur of conversations. His focus was locked on the man sitting across from him. Daniel Hayes, a retired investigator with a sharp eye, sharper instincts, and a reputation for digging up the kinds of truths no one wanted unearthed. Cole handed over the file. "You're telling me," Hayes said, voice low, his fingers skimming the report, "that the gun used to convict Jalen Brooks was in police custody before the crime?" Cole nodded, hands wrapped tight around his coffee mug. "That was the prosecution's linchpin," he said. "They built the entire case on it." Hayes leaned back in his chair, dead silent for a long moment. Then, "This isn't just bad policing. This is deliberate. Someone wanted that kid to take the fall." Cole clenched his jaw. "If we don't do something, no one will. Jalen is sitting in prison right now for a crime he didn't commit. And whoever orchestrated this, they're walking free." Hayes studied him for a long second, then gave a slow, hard nod. "All right," he said. "But once we start pulling this thread, we can't stop. You ready for that?" Cole didn't hesitate. "I don't have a choice." Over the next few days, the two men worked in secret. They met at Hayes's house, papers spread across the living room like crime scene evidence. They dug through transcripts, phone records, body cam footage, surveillance logs. It didn't take long before the truth began to rot through the walls. "Look at this," Hayes muttered one night, sliding over a grainy surveillance video. "Check the timestamps." Cole squinted at the footage. "This is when Jalen was supposedly fleeing the scene," he said. Hayes nodded. "Except the video was spliced. Several critical minutes are missing." Cole leaned in. "Someone doctored this, edited the tape to make it match the narrative." Hayes handed over another file. "And this witness," he said, pointing to a name. "The store clerk originally identified someone else, a completely different build, taller, lighter, but after a talk with Detective Randy Klein, his statement changed." Cole felt a cold fury rise in his chest. Klein hadn't made a mistake. He'd fabricated the entire case. Hayes nodded grimly. "And he's not acting alone. A cover-up this big, he's got people protecting him, watchdogs who know how to scrub things clean." And then the threats began. Anonymous phone calls, just static followed by a soft click. Then came the letters, scratched in black marker, barely legible. You need to stop. You're in over your head. Leave it alone. One morning, Cole stepped out onto his front driveway. His car sat lopsided, all 4 tires slashed. Red spray paint scrawled across the windshield read, "Stop." Hayes showed up minutes later. His face was stone. "This isn't a warning anymore," he said. "This is an order." But Cole didn't flinch. He stared at the red letters like they were fuel. "They think I'll back down," he said, voice low, resolute. "They don't know me at all." That night, as the threats grew louder, Judge Cole sat alone in his study, staring down at another anonymous note. The words glared up at him. "The system is bigger than you." He didn't blink. He picked up the phone, called Hayes. "We're not stopping," he said, steady as ever. There was no pause on the other end. "Damn right we're not," Hayes replied. As Cole hung up, he glanced at the gavel resting on his desk. It wasn't just a symbol of justice anymore. It was a reminder of everything that had gone wrong and everything he had to make right. Full length, no cuts. All original story beat preserved. Deep emotionally rich narration with changed character names: Jalen Brooks, Judge Everett Cole, Detective Randy Klein. Tone, American, reflective, bold. The courtroom was packed, not with chaos, but with a tension so heavy it was nearly physical. Reporters crammed into the back rows, pens and lenses aimed at the front of the room. Family members clung to one another. Former jurors returned, quietly summoned. Lawyers sat upright, jaws tight. This wasn't just a hearing. This was a reckoning. At the defense table sat Jalen Brooks. His posture was straight, but his hands betrayed him. They trembled just slightly in his lap. The jumpsuit he wore looked looser than the last time he'd worn it. Prison had done that. His face was thinner, his eyes more sunken, but his spirit unbroken. And just a few feet away stood Judge Everett Cole. But not as a judge today, not in his robe, not behind a bench. Today he stood in the well of the court as a man seeking to undo his own mistake. Cole approached the bench where Judge Lena Harmon presided, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had built her career holding corrupt officers and dirty lawyers to account. Her gaze met Cole's without warmth, but with professional respect. "Your Honor," Cole said, holding up a thick file, "the evidence I present today not only exonerates Jalen Brooks, but exposes a deliberate attempt to frame him for a crime he did not commit." A hush swept across the room like a cold draft. Judge Harmon nodded once. "Proceed." Cole gestured to the projection screen behind him. It flickered to life, showing grainy surveillance footage. "This is footage from a parking lot adjacent to the jewelry store on the day of the robbery," he explained. The video played. It showed a man, matching Detective Randy Klein's build, leaving the scene of the crime with a large black duffel bag. The timestamp, moments after the robbery, gasps rippled through the gallery. Klein, seated behind his attorney, stiffened, his jaw clenched. Jalen's hands gripped the table edge in front of him. His mother reached forward from behind, her fingertips gently brushing his shoulder. And still, Judge Cole pressed forward. "This," he said, lifting a small recorder, "is a recovered audio file, one that was deleted from police archives." Judge Harmon raised an eyebrow. "Play it." Cole nodded and hit the button. Detective Klein's voice filled the room, clear, cold, undeniable. "If you don't ID Jalen Brooks, I'll make sure you're charged with obstruction. Say what I tell you, and you'll walk free." The gallery froze. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Klein stood up abruptly, face flushed. This is absurd. This is a setup. A witch hunt. His lawyer tugged at his sleeve, urging him to sit, but Klein shook him off. He pointed at Cole. He's doing this to ruin me. He's jealous of my record. He's obsessed. Judge Harmon slammed her gavel. Detective Klein, sit down or be removed. Klein's body tensed, but he obeyed, barely. Cole turned back to the bench, lifting another document. This is a sworn affidavit from a former evidence clerk. He confirms that the gun used to convict Jalen Brooks, Exhibit B, was in police custody 2 days before the robbery ever occurred. He handed it to the bailiff. This evidence was buried, the footage tampered, the witness coerced, and the fingerprints. He looked at Klein, planted by someone who knew how to manipulate a system they thought would never turn on them. A deep silence fell. Then Judge Harmon spoke. Her voice was level but carried weight like a thundercloud. After reviewing the exhibits and testimonies presented, she said, turning to Jalen, "This court finds sufficient evidence to overturn your conviction." She took a breath. "You are hereby declared innocent and are released immediately." The room exploded. Tears, applause. Reporters rushed forward. But Jalen didn't move. He just sat still, eyes blinking, like he couldn't believe he'd heard right. Until his mother rose from the front row, walked to him, and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. Only then did his body collapse into hers. And the tears finally came. Judge Harmon wasn't finished. She turned sharply toward Klein. "Take Detective Randy Klein into custody." The bailiffs approached. "You will be charged with obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and perjury." Klein's face contorted. He hissed under his breath toward Cole as the handcuffs clicked. "You've just destroyed yourself, old man. You'll regret this." Cole didn't blink. "No, Randy," he said softly. "I'm finally doing what I should have done all along." Outside, the courthouse steps overflowed with people and flashing cameras. The air buzzed with headlines and victory. But for Jalen Brooks, it was quiet. Standing on the steps with his mother's hand in his, he looked up at the sky, the way only a man can when he hasn't seen it without bars for months. The sunlight struck his face like a blessing. He inhaled deeply and smiled. In the distance, Judge Everett Cole stood with Daniel Hayes beside him. Hayes clapped him on the back. "You did it." Cole gave the faintest nod. "No," he said. "We did." Full version, uncut, true to original, deep, reflective, American narrative voice for adult audience. Characters renamed: Marcus, Jalen Brooks, Graves, Judge Everett Cole, Cooper, Detective Randy Klein. The courthouse steps were nearly empty now. Reporters had packed up. The crowd had thinned. Most of the flashes were gone, and the energy that had surged like a storm had finally begun to settle. But Jalen Brooks didn't move. He stood at the base of those stone steps, his mother's arms wrapped tightly around him, her hands cupping the back of his head like she used to when he was just a boy with scraped knees and big dreams. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silence was louder than any headline, more sacred than any verdict. It was the silence of survival. From a quiet bench inside the courthouse gallery, Judge Everett Cole watched. He sat alone, half in shadow, arms resting in his lap, eyes fixed on the two people who mattered more to this case than any law book ever had. For decades, Cole had believed the law, when followed, would never fail. Today, he realized something bigger. Justice isn't about rules. It's about people. It's about truth. It's about owning the weight of your choices. And as he watched Jalen walk down those steps, free and whole, he knew this was the first real judgment he'd ever given that actually meant something. But outside that moment of healing, hell had broken loose. The charges against Detective Randy Klein, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, perjury, were just the beginning. Once the surface cracked, everything beneath it began to ooze. Internal Affairs launched a full investigation into the Fresno Police Department. What they found? A web. False reports, coerced confessions, edited video footage. A system that didn't just make mistakes, it manufactured convictions. And Klein, he was just the loudest monster in a room full of silent ones. The community responded, protests flared, marches surged down streets with signs held high. Free them all. Jalen is just one. When justice fails one, it fails us all. The city council was forced to hold emergency hearings. The police chief resigned, and for the first time in decades, regular people like Jalen's mother, neighbors, retired teachers, ex-cons, stood in front of microphones and told their truths. Through it all, Jalen Brooks didn't disappear. He could have. He could have changed his name, moved states, left it behind, but instead he showed up. One morning, standing before a room full of reporters and TV cameras, Jalen cleared his throat and spoke. This isn't about revenge. It's not even about me. It's about the thousands of people still sitting in cells for crimes they didn't commit. It's about the system that made me a number before it ever saw my face. He paused. We don't need better lawyers. We need better truth. We need people who care more about what's right than what's easy. Back at home, Judge Cole sat in his study. The old gavel sat on his desk, untouched for days. He couldn't bring himself to look at it the same way. He used to see it as order. Now it looked like arrogance. He stared out the window, wondering how many other men he'd sentenced with evidence that seemed solid, until it wasn't. How many Jalen Brooks had he missed? How many names didn't get the benefit of a second look? The question haunted him, but it also sparked something new: resolve. Weeks later, Jalen stood on stage at a packed community center. His mother sat in the front row. Dean Hayes was off to the side, arms crossed proudly. And Judge Cole, no longer behind a bench, no longer cloaked in prestige, sat quietly in the back row, listening. Jalen's voice rang through the room with quiet strength. We live in a world where justice doesn't always mean truth, but we also live in a world where people, good people, can still choose to do what's right. He looked toward Judge Cole. Judge Cole didn't have to fight for me, but he did. And because of that, I'm standing here today, not broken, not bitter, but free. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous, raw, real, the sound of a community healing. Cole stood in the back, arms crossed, a rare smile on his face. For a man who had spent most of his life handing down verdicts, he finally understood justice isn't a sentence, it's an act, and sometimes it's a fight. Who was right? Who was wrong? Detective Randy Klein was wrong, not by accident, but by choice. He protected power, not people. Judge Everett Cole was wrong too, but he was brave enough to face it, to unlearn, to take the fall, to speak up. And Jalen Brooks, he was always right. He never broke. He never let their lies make him small. He waited for truth, and when it came, he amplified it for others. Justice isn't always in the courtroom. It's in the courage to say, we got it wrong, and to do something about it. If this story moved you, don't stay quiet. Tap the like button, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you discovered the system had failed someone? And subscribe to our channel, Black Women, for more true stories that fight for truth, voice, and freedom. Because when one of us is silenced, all of us are at risk. But when one of us speaks out, we rise together.